I know that for other people, they don't always understand that that's not legitimate. They also, in doing that, then will say, but you can avoid this by giving me this personal information and payment to quash that, which again is not how that works. So that is really what their aim is, regardless of what it is, whether it's back taxes, it is your IRS taxes, or it's a grandchild who's been arrested, or there's also scams for jury summons. So they'll say that you were sent a summons and you didn't appear, so now you're in contempt of court. An arrest warrant will issue, but they will ask for their personal information. Well, if you're a juror, for them to summons you, they already have your personal information. So that's one big tip-off. And they claim that payment of money will get you out of it. That is never handled that way. You must appear personally in court, which is almost all of these things. You would appear personally before an administrative agency or a court to resolve it. Somebody's calling you on the phone asking for information or money, that's not legitimate. And again, they will even put somebody on the phone with a bad phone connection to make it sound like a young child, but it's not distinct enough where some of them don't know that that's not their relative, and the conversation is so brief that they try to make them actually believe that this person is in custody. But that's the other thing too, is that that's not how the world works. You would pay it directly to the clerk of court when the courthouse is open, or to the jail where they're held, or through a bondsman. So anybody just asking for it over the phone, that is not a legitimate way to deal with bonds for any type of criminal offense. We also have lottery scams. I actually was contacted by someone when I used to work in eastern Iowa that said that they were notified that they won a very large lottery prize. And my first question was, did you enter a lottery? Of course they didn't. So how can you win if you don't play? So that's first, a sign that it's not legitimate. But often they claim that there are certain fees to be paid in order to receive the prize, which should not be the case. That's all they're interested in is this, down payment or taxes that you're paying up front. You don't have to pay taxes up front. It's normally taken out of your award. But again, you can't win an award for a contest you never entered. Sometimes you'll get emails that are pretending to be your credit card company, which I find a little bit suspicious at times. They will ask for information that they should already have, or they'll claim that there's an issue, but I never respond by email because I don't know where that email really comes from. So I will get my physical card and call customer service. And that's generally a way that you can avoid those problems, because that was issued to you by your credit card company. That's a method of contact. They have fraud departments. Instead of responding to anything online, because again, people can pretend to be somebody else online, and what they're trying to do is access your information so they can commit identity theft. And so I always try to tell people too, it's like, if you're not sure about something, first talk to a family member that you trust. And if you don't have that, or if they agree it's suspicious, talk to law enforcement. Now, sometimes we have local people, and that's why it's important that we're doing scams, and that's why it's important to talk to law enforcement. So I tell them, keep in mind, if it's a legal matter, it should always be done at the courthouse, not over the phone. You can always call law enforcement to make sure if that sounds legitimate. If you don't enter a contest, you're not going to win it. Your credit card, the IRS and law enforcement already have your personal information, so they shouldn't be asking for that kind of information. And most matters aren't urgent, so don't let anyone pressure you. Now, I've actually had prosecutions regarding repair people. I had a gentleman in eastern Iowa that was going around offering to do roofs, which are very expensive. We're talking about several $1,000s each job, but he would accept money and never perform any work. Now, the problem is in the state of Iowa, it kind of depends on the circumstances of whether it's civil or criminal, because civil, obviously, the person is on their own, they've got to file a lawsuit, they got to prove it up, and then if they get a judgment, then it's up for them to collect it. So if it can go criminal, I mean, we can get involved, we have resources, we have, not that they were tardy, because those are civil contract issues, but if you can show that they never had an intent to perform, then it's criminal, because all they're doing is they're getting your money and they're walking away. They never had an intent to get around to you at some point. A lot of times they might respond once or twice to an inquiry of when are you going to start work, but then that never materializes, especially even when they just say, okay, if you can't perform this work, then refund my money. Going out to people, they should really look for somebody who's local and maybe who's trustworthy, because somebody they know has actually done business with them. So if they need that kind of work, I would say that that's a better way to go about it, because if someone's just showing up at your house offering those services, that's really suspicious. Often family members become their power of attorney. I've run into the circumstance, both in eastern Iowa and here, where a lot of people, whether it's defense attorneys, judges, law enforcement, think, well, they're power of attorney, so what can we do? It's actually excellent. It's awesome, because what a power of attorney does is it actually puts a financial obligation, because you have a fiduciary duty to that person. So if I'm your power of attorney, Tasha, guess what I can't do? I can't go take your money and go get Kerrie facials, because that is not for your care, that is not for your benefit. Okay, but sometimes, let's imagine that you're actually my grandma, okay? Now, one of the exceptions I can do with the use of your money is if you have enough money, and let's say you commonly give to the American Cancer Society $50 every year. I can do that because there's a history of that gifting, or even if you would give to other grandchildren or whatever, their $50 upon their graduation or their birthday or whatever, you can honor those. But otherwise, I have to use the money for your care and for your benefit. Now, I actually had a lady who did this to her mom. Not only did she dump her at a nursing home and abandon her, but she was buying, her mom, I guess, was really into guns. She bought a couple of guns at Bass Pro. And what are you going to do when you get guns? I mean, you got to shoot them somewhere, right? So she was using her mom's money to go to 88 Tactical. It's a place over in far west Nebraska, outside of Omaha, I should say, where you can do various training, self-defense, do shooting classes. And Victoria's Secret, I didn't know that a 85-year-old woman still, I guess, wanted to wear those kind of nice things. But you know what's important about that is sizes. Because sometimes grandma and daughter or mom and daughter are not the same size. And so that's a big tip, that wasn't really for mom. The other thing is Crescent Ski area. So when her attorney just said, well, how do you know this is not for her care? I said, do you think that she's skiing or ziplining? Because I think they have ziplining out there now.
Yeah.
I said, that's interesting for someone who has to be in a 24-hour care facility because her dementia is so bad and her mobility is somewhat limited, that she could enjoy those type of activities. So that person ended up pleading guilty. Now she was pretty much drained, and I did have to go through some lengths to remove her as power of attorney and also get her off as payee for Social Security, because obviously when she was placed in the nursing home, they need to have those funds. I will tell you a big struggle in these situations is that, okay, so once, daughter did her wrong, who's gonna be her guardian? Sometimes there's just no one who's either a good choice or is willing to do it, and it is horrible. It's horrible. Now, often when they're in facilities such as a nursing home, they'll agree to be a payee. So it's at least minimal management of their care, and the reality is that most people, even with a retirement and Social Security, are still going to need a Medicaid supplement in order to pay for their care. So they're getting, it used to be $50. I don't know if it's gotten much more of that. It's a very minimal amount for your personal hygiene or other matters you need to purchase for yourself. So, the facility doesn't have a lot outside of just taking their fees to manage. So they often do that. But especially for people who haven't reached that level of care, but they are somewhat victimized, because let's face it, a lot of people don't want to leave their homes. It's really tough to find someone who will be responsible and who will do the right thing. I was actually asked to review a couple guardian reports, because once you are appointed guardian, you have to do a report within a certain period of time initially, and then there's periodic reports. But they were so suspicious, and there was such a change in the money where I was asked to review that. So it's not always strangers. That's the sad thing. Kids will do it to you. Kids feel entitled to their parents' money. They don't seem to care that they have needs while they're still on this earth. It's not just about helping them out. They will literally drain them dry. But sometimes it is strangers. I had a guy who I prosecuted that was doing yard work for this lady. Now she had a son. Here's the interesting thing, is that so when her accounts kept having all these large transfers, these CDs that were cashed in, all this stuff, because this yard work was crazy expensive. You wouldn't believe how expensive it was. But we got alerted to the fact. Well, interestingly enough, son was cooperative initially with the prosecution, but once we bring in charged defendant, the guy who's just showing up to do the yard work, he just said, son's part of the scheme, right? So I basically told the son he had to take a polygraph with the defendant. He failed, but of course mom didn't want him charged. But that's what I'm just saying, is sometimes it's family that's part of the problem. Sometimes and sometimes I can actually send out subpoenas without there being a charged crime. It's called a county attorney subpoena. I can investigate to find out if there is a crime. So I can subpoena medical records, bank records, things that are normally confidential to determine if somebody is in fact committing a crime. Now, there has been some legislation that has been passed. One of it is the Senior Safe Act, which is really good because, again, federally financial information is protected, but this allows banks and financial advisors to be to not be liable and not be worried about their privacy. If they see some of this crazy, spending transactions going on, they can alert police or adult protective services about potential elder financial abuse. Now, I will tell you that I used to do these cases before they ever had a statute. I mean, to me, theft is theft, and I'll find a way to get you. Especially if you're a power of attorney, you have a duty, and I was successful in prosecuting people in eastern Iowa. By the time I came over here, they did pass legislation specifically in regard to elder financial abuse. It only has to be the theft of money over $200, and that's a Class D felony. Normally, that would be a misdemeanor. So I do think that they are trying to increase the penalties. The problem is that when you prosecute some of these people, they blow the money. They might be drug addicts, and so the money's gone. So even if you prosecute them, unfortunately, it still leaves those folks in some, pretty dire financial straits. So, getting them connected to services, maybe with Medicaid or, other, help out there in our community is very important, because they will leave them with nothing. The purpose of the legislation also suggested that they train their staff to look for signs, because of course if you don't know what to look for, how can you report it? Because it's not like somebody's going to come in and announce it. But again, it's just looking for those unusual patterns of spending activity or just transfers out that is totally different than what had been, especially, sometimes grandma's coming in, handling her finances, then pretty soon somebody else is on her account, then she's not coming into the bank anymore. It's just her representative, and then huge amounts of money are going out. That's usually a very common sign. And apparently reports have increased since that legislation. But according to an article from the National District Association, Attorneys Association, I'm a county prosecutor. I'm now cross-designated as a federal prosecutor, but we have a National District Attorney Association that looks at trends and issues over, the entire country. And they understand that, senior abuse, whether physical or financial, is a very underreported crime. It's a very major crime, and they estimated that 5 million elders are abused in some form every year. 5 million. That's kind of scary to think about. And one of the things that for financial advisors, they came up with this trusted contact rule. But the problem is, unless you're signing up for the first time or making changes to your account, if they're just existing and have never thought to do anything about it, then that's not required. So I think that the legislation is moving in the right direction, but there's probably more that they can do, and they also can't share across from financial person to another, which I think, what is the purpose in that? To me, the more you shine a light on things, the more you can see when things are wrong. So if there is a concern, DHS actually has responsibility of investigating not only child abuse, but if a person is considered a dependent adult where they can't manage their own affairs, often because of mental capacity, but sometimes people are so physically incapacitated that they can't really take care of their needs as well. I've seen differences depending on which investigator it is, whether they determine that's a dependent adult, but I think it can qualify. So obviously a person can make a report to DHS. I have the sheriff's office down here just because that encompasses the whole county. Obviously the police department would be the person to call if the person was located in the city of Council Bluffs, and that's where the incident occurred, because it's not just where the person's located. If they're being physically abused, of course it's where their body is physically located. But let's say I live in the city of Council Bluffs, but I decide to bank at Trainer Bank. Well, that's going to be the sheriff's office, because if they're committing crimes by doing transactions at the bank, then that would be the sheriff's office, because it's outside of our city limits.